Welcome to What If Sleepstorian, where What If whispers timeless tales into dreams. Breathe deeply, let your mind soften, and drift into tonight's gentle story. What if, in the golden glow of the 1920s, where jazz floated through crystal chandeliers and secrets hid behind silk fans, a masterpiece thought lost to flames found its way back into the world, only to vanish once more like morning mist? So dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let these whispered narratives carry you softly towards sleep. The evening air in London carried the soft scent of rain-washed cobblestones and the distant hum of motorcar engines, their gentle purring mixing with the clip-clop of horse-drawn carriages that still wound their way through the gas-lit streets. It was 1925, and the world seemed caught between two dreams, the old world of gaslight and gentle manners, and the new world of electric bulbs and jazz music that drifted from half-opened windows like smoke. In the heart of Mayfair, where the building stood proud and elegant against the pewter sky, the Beaumont Gallery glowed with warm amber light. Through its tall windows one could glimpse the shimmer of evening gowns and the glint of champagne glasses, the soft murmur of cultured voices discussing art and beauty in hushed, reverent tones. The gallery's walls were adorned with paintings that seemed to breathe in the gentle light, landscapes that whispered of distant shores, portraits whose eyes followed visitors with knowing smiles. But tonight, all attention was focused on one particular canvas that hung in the place of honour, bathed in a pool of golden light that made it seem almost alive. It was a painting that should not have existed, a work that the art world had mourned as lost forever 15 years ago, in a terrible fire that had consumed the private collection of the late Lord Pemberton. Yet here it was, as vivid and mysterious as the day it had been painted, The Lady in Crimson by the master artist Giovanni Rossetti. The painting depicted a woman of extraordinary beauty, her dark hair cascading like a waterfall over one shoulder, her crimson dress the colour of deep wine or fresh roses. But it was her eyes that captured the soul, eyes that seemed to hold secrets, that seemed to see beyond the canvas into the very hearts of those who gazed upon her. The brushwork was exquisite, each stroke deliberate and filled with passion, the colours so rich they seemed to pulse with life. The soft click of polished shoes on marble floors created a gentle rhythm as guests moved through the gallery, their voices a quiet symphony of appreciation and wonder. Among them moved a small, precise figure whose presence seemed to command attention despite his modest stature. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, moved with the careful grace of a man who noticed everything. The way shadows fell across faces, the hesitation in a voice, the tremor of a hand holding a champagne glass. His impeccable appearance was, as always, a study in perfection. His dark suit was pressed to knife-sharp creases, his patent leather shoes reflected the gallery lights like black mirrors, and his famous moustache was waxed to geometric precision. Yet it was his eyes, green as spring leaves and bright with intelligence, that truly marked him as extraordinary. They missed nothing, those eyes, cataloguing every detail with the precision of a camera and the insight of a poet. Poirot had been invited to tonight's exhibition by his friend Sir Reginald Ashworth, a collector of fine art and finer mysteries. Sir Reginald was a man of distinguished bearing, his silver hair perfectly styled, his evening wear impeccable. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of one born to privilege, yet his eyes held a warmth that spoke of genuine kindness. "Magnificent, isn't it, Poirot?" Sir Reginald murmured as they stood before the Lady in Crimson. His voice carried the cultured accent of old English aristocracy, soft and measured like aged whiskey. "To think we believed her lost forever. Sometimes, my friend, life grants us the most unexpected gifts." Poirot tilted his head slightly, studying the painting with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient text. "Indeed, mon ami, it is, how do you say, breathtaking. But tell me, you're certain of its authenticity? Such a return from the ashes, it is not without its complications." The question hung in the air like incense, delicate but persistent. Sir Reginald's smile flickered slightly, and for just a moment something Worry, perhaps, or uncertainty crossed his distinguished features like a cloud passing over the moon. "The experts have examined it thoroughly," he replied, though his voice carried a note that might have been defensiveness. "Professor Whitmore from the Royal Academy, Lady Catherine Thornbury, one of the foremost authorities on Italian Renaissance art, they all agree. It is genuine, without question." Yet as Sir Reginald spoke, Poirot's acute hearing caught the subtle tremor in his friend's voice, the way his fingers worried at his champagne glass, the slight stiffness in his posture. These were the small tells that spoke louder than words to a man who had made his life's work the reading of human nature. The gallery hummed with quiet conversation, the gentle clink of crystal, and the soft rustle of silk gowns as women moved like graceful swans through the warm light. The air carried the mingled scents of expensive perfume, fresh flowers from the elaborate arrangements that graced each corner, and the faint, pleasant mustiness of old wood and aged paint that seemed to emanate from the artwork itself. Near the painting, a small group had gathered around a woman of striking appearance. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair arranged in the fashionable finger waves of the era, and she wore a gown of deep blue that complemented her intelligent hazel eyes. This was Lady Catherine Thornbury, the art expert Sir Reginald had mentioned, and she spoke with the authority of one whose knowledge was both deep and hard-won. "The technique is unmistakably Rossetti's," she was saying, her voice carrying the crisp precision of academia softened by genuine passion for her subject. "See how he builds the shadows in the woman's face, layer upon layer of translucent glazes. No foreigner of the modern era possesses such patience, such understanding of the old methods." Beside her stood a younger man, perhaps 35, with dark hair slicked back in the current fashion, and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. This was Marcus Grayson, owner of the Beaumont Gallery and the man responsible for tonight's exhibition. He nodded approvingly at Lady Catherine's words, though Poirot noticed how his gaze kept returning to the painting with an intensity that seemed almost proprietary. "The painting came to us through entirely legitimate channels," Grayson added, his voice smooth as silk. "The previous owner, who wishes to remain anonymous, had kept it in their private collection for years unaware of its significance. It was only when they decided to have their collection appraised that the painting's true identity was discovered." As Grayson spoke, a third figure approached the group, an elderly man with a magnificent white beard and eyes that sparkled with the wisdom of decades spent in pursuit of knowledge. Professor Edmund Whitmore carried himself with the slightly stooped posture of one who had spent countless hours bent over books and manuscripts, yet his mind was sharp as a razor, and his reputation in the art world was beyond reproach. "I must confess," Professor Whitmore said, his voice carrying the warm tones of a natural storyteller, "when I first received the call to examine this piece, I was sceptical. The circumstances of the fire at Lord Pemberton's estate were quite thoroughly documented. The collection was thought to be completely destroyed. Yet here we stand, in the presence of a work that by all rights should exist only in photographs and memories." He paused, gazing up at the painted lady with something approaching reverence. "But art, my dear friends, has a way of defying our expectations. I have examined every inch of this canvas, every brushstroke, every pigment. The age is correct, the technique flawless, the provenance, while unusual, appears to be legitimate. Sometimes miracles do occur." Poirot listened to this exchange with the careful attention of a musician tuning an instrument, catching not only the words, but the subtle harmonics beneath them. Professor Whitmore's conviction was evident, yet there was something in his manner, a slight hesitation perhaps, or the way his eyes seemed to avoid lingering too long on certain details of the painting, that suggested his certainty was not quite as complete as his words implied. The evening continued its gentle flow, guests drifting from painting to painting like petals on a slow-moving stream. The conversation remained cultured and subdued, the lighting soft and forgiving, creating an atmosphere of refined tranquility. Waiters moved silently through the crowd, offering champagne and delicate canapes from silver trays, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets that covered the gallery's marble floors. Poirot found himself drawn again and again to the lady in crimson, studying her face with an intensity that bordered on meditation. There was something about her expression, serene yet knowing, beautiful yet somehow melancholy, that spoke to him in ways he could not quite articulate. It was as if she held secrets that transcended the mere pigment and canvas of her creation, as if the artist had somehow captured not just her physical beauty, but the essence of mystery itself. As he stood there, lost in contemplation, Poirot became aware of a presence beside him. He turned to find a woman of perhaps 28, with striking features and an elegance that spoke of both breeding and intelligence. She wore a gown of emerald silk that complemented her dark hair and pale skin, and she moved with the fluid grace of a dancer. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Poirot's trained ear immediately identified as French. "Though I confess there's something about her that makes me uneasy, as if she's watching us as much as we're watching her." Poirot turned to study this new companion with interest. "Mademoiselle speaks with great perception. May I inquire?" "Antoinette Dubois," she replied with a slight smile. "I represent certain private collectors on the continent. Art that has been lost or misplaced sometimes finds its way back to its rightful owners through my efforts." The words were spoken lightly, almost casually, yet they carried undertones that made Poirot's detective instincts stir like a cat sensing prey. In his experience, those who dealt in lost art often operated in the grey areas between legal and illegal, between legitimate recovery and sophisticated theft. "Ah," Poirot murmured, his tone carefully neutral, "and you are here tonight because the appearance of such a painting, though lost for so many years, is significant. There are those who would pay handsomely to recover works that were stolen from their families during times of upheaval." Her eyes remained fixed on the painting as she spoke, and Poirot noted the careful way she chose her words. Before he could respond, the gentle hum of conversation was interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the painting. Heads turned, champagne glasses paused halfway to lips, and a ripple of concerned murmurs spread through the gathered crowd. Lady Catherine Thornbury stood before the lady in crimson, her face pale as moonlight, one hand pressed to her throat in a gesture of barely controlled distress. Her eyes were fixed on the painting with an intensity that bordered on horror, and when she spoke, her voice carried a tremor that seemed to chill the very air. This cannot be," she whispered, her words barely audible yet somehow carrying to every corner of the now silent gallery. "The brushwork in the lower right corner, the signature. I examined this painting only yesterday, and I swear." Her words trailed off into stunned silence, and the gathered crowd waited with held breath for her to continue. Marcus Grayson moved quickly to her side, his face a mask of professional concern. "Lady Catherine, is something wrong?" She turned to look at him, and in her eyes was a confusion so profound it seemed to transform her very features. "Mr. Grayson, I must ask, has anyone had access to this painting since yesterday? Any opportunity to alter it in any way?" The question hung in the air like a note from a discordant piano. Beautiful, yet somehow wrong. Grayson's smooth composure cracked slightly, revealing something beneath. Concern, perhaps, or fear. "Absolutely not," he replied quickly. "The painting has been under constant security since it arrived. No one has touched it, I assure you." But Lady Catherine was shaking her head slowly, her gaze returning to the painting with the intensity of one trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Then I must be losing my mind," she murmured, "for I would swear that this is not the same painting I examined yesterday. Oh, it is masterful, perhaps more masterful than the original, but there are differences. Subtle, nearly invisible, but differences nonetheless." The silence that followed her words was profound, broken only by the soft tick of an antique clock somewhere in the gallery's depths, and the distant sound of rain beginning to patter against the tall windows. Professor Whitmore approached slowly, his expression grave. "Lady Catherine, you are suggesting forgery." His voice was carefully controlled, but beneath it lay currents of professional concern and personal distress. "I am suggesting nothing," she replied, her academic training reasserting itself despite her obvious turmoil. "I am merely observing that my memory, which I have trusted implicitly for 30 years of art scholarship, tells me that certain details of this painting have changed." As this extraordinary conversation unfolded, Poirot found his attention sharpening like a blade being honed. His green eyes moved systematically around the room, cataloguing faces, expressions, the way people held their bodies. Marcus Grayson's hands were clenched at his sides. Sir Reginald's champagne glass trembled slightly. Professor Whitmore's brow was furrowed with deep lines of concentration. Antoinette Dubois watched the scene with the detached interest of one observing a particularly fascinating performance. The rain outside had grown heavier, its rhythmic drumming against the windows providing a counterpoint to the tension within. The gallery's warm light seemed suddenly less welcoming, the shadows between the paintings deeper and more mysterious. It was as if the very atmosphere had shifted, transforming a pleasant social gathering into something altogether more complex and potentially dangerous. Marcus Grayson cleared his throat, his voice carefully modulated to project calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure this is simply a case of perspective. Perhaps the different lighting tonight has altered our perception of the painting's details. These things happen more often than one might think." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. Lady Catherine's reputation was beyond question. If she detected differences in the painting, then differences there were. The implications of her observation were staggering, for if the painting had indeed been altered or replaced, it meant that someone had achieved the impossible. They had created a forgery so perfect that it had fooled the most expert eyes in London, then somehow substituted it for the original without detection. Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding attention despite his modest stature. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of one accustomed to being heard and believed. "Mesdames et messieurs, perhaps it would be wise to examine the painting more closely. Lady Catherine's expertise is, I believe, beyond question. If she observes differences, then we must take her concerns seriously." Professor Whitmore nodded gravely. "Quite right, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Catherine, would you be so kind as to point out specifically what has troubled you?" With visible effort, Lady Catherine composed herself and approached the painting. The crowd gathered around her in a semicircle, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, concern, and barely suppressed excitement. This was, after all, the stuff of legend, a potential art fraud being discovered in real time by the finest minds in the field. "Here," Lady Catherine said, pointing to the lower right corner of the canvas. "Yesterday, when I examined the signature, the final flourish of the eye in Rossetti extended precisely to this point." She indicated a specific spot with the tip of her gloved finger. "Tonight it extends slightly further, perhaps 2 millimeters, no more. A trivial difference to the untrained eye, but impossible to explain if the painting has been under constant security," Professor Whitmore finished grimly. "And here," Lady Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger as her professional training overrode her emotional distress, "the shading beneath the lady's left eye. Yesterday it was built up in 5 distinct layers, each clearly visible under magnification. Tonight—" She paused, leaning closer. "Tonight I see 6 layers. The additional layer is masterfully done, nearly invisible, but it creates a slightly different emotional resonance in her expression. The silence that greeted her words was profound. Even the rain seemed to have quieted, as if nature itself was listening to this extraordinary revelation. Poirot found himself studying not the painting but the faces around him, reading the complex emotions that played across each features like shadows and light. Marcus Grayson's face had gone pale, and a thin sheen of perspiration had appeared on his brow, despite the gallery's comfortable temperature. This is impossible," he stammered. "The security system is state-of-the-art. No one could have accessed the painting without triggering multiple alarms." "And yet," Poirot murmured, his voice soft as silk but carrying clearly in the hushed space, "here we are confronted with evidence that suggests otherwise. Tell me, Monsieur Grayson, who has had access to the gallery since the painting was hung. Grayson ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disturbing its perfect arrangement for the first time that evening. Only myself, my assistant Sarah Mitchell, and the security guard Thompson. But I can vouch absolutely for their integrity. They would never... He trailed off, perhaps realising how hollow his assurances sounded in the face of the impossible evidence before them. Sir Reginald stepped forward, his expression grave. "Poirot, you have dealt with such mysteries before. What do you think has happened here?" Poirot was silent for a long moment, his green eyes studying the painting with the intensity of a scholar reading an ancient manuscript. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of considered judgment. "I think, mon ami, that we are dealing with someone of extraordinary skill and audacity. To replace a painting of this calibre without detection would require not only masterful artistic ability, but also intimate knowledge of security systems, expert timing, and access to resources that most criminals could earn." As if summoned by his words, a new figure appeared at the gallery's entrance, a young woman of perhaps 25 with honey-coloured hair and intelligent blue eyes. She moved with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to managing details and solving problems, and her arrival seemed to bring a momentary lightening of the oppressive atmosphere. "Mr. Grayson," she called out, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Thompson asked me to inform you that he's noticed something unusual about the security recordings from last night." This was clearly Sarah Mitchell, Grayson's assistant, and her words caused another stir among the gathered guests. Grayson turned to her with an expression that mixed hope with dread. "What kind of unusual, Sarah?" "He says there's a gap, about 15 minutes around midnight, where the cameras seem to have malfunctioned. The recording shows nothing but static during that time." The implications of her words hit the gathering like a physical blow. A 15-minute gap in security surveillance was exactly the window of opportunity a skilled thief would need to replace one masterpiece with another. The fact that such a gap had occurred on the very night before Lady Catherine's discovery seemed too coincidental to be mere chance. Professor Whitmore stroked his magnificent white beard thoughtfully. 15 minutes would be sufficient time for someone with the proper preparation and equipment. If they had previously studied the painting, created an exact replica, and planned their approach carefully. "But the skill required," Lady Catherine interjected, her academic mind grappling with the implications. "To create a forgery so perfect that it could fool expert examination, yet different enough that I could detect the variations under close scrutiny. It would require not just technical mastery, but an almost supernatural understanding of Rossetti's methods." Antoinette Dubois, who had remained silent throughout much of the exchange, now spoke with quiet intensity. "There are perhaps half a dozen forgers in the world capable of such work. Most of them are known to certain circles. If someone commissioned such a piece, there would be whispers, rumours." All eyes turned to her, and Poirot sensed that her words carried more weight than their casual delivery might suggest. In his experience, those who claimed knowledge of the criminal underworld usually possessed it through direct experience, rather than mere academic interest. "Mademoiselle speaks with great authority," he observed mildly. "Perhaps you could enlighten us about these certain circles." For just a moment something flickered in Antoinette's dark eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or the kind of quick mental arithmetic that criminals perform when deciding how much truth to reveal. Then she smiled, and the expression transformed her features into those of an innocent art enthusiast. "I deal in the recovery of stolen artwork, Monsieur Poirot. In my line of work, one learns about the darker side of the art world. Forgers, thieves, corrupt dealers, they form a small, interconnected community. Word travels quickly among them." Her explanation was reasonable, even plausible, yet something in her manner suggested layers of complexity beneath the surface. Poirot filed this impression away for later consideration, along with the growing collection of observations and questions that were accumulating around this most perplexing case. The evening had taken on a surreal quality, as if the very air in the gallery had thickened with mystery and tension. The gentle social gathering had transformed into something altogether more complex, a puzzle that seemed to grow more intricate with each revelation. The painting itself seemed to watch over the proceedings with those enigmatic painted eyes, as if the lady in crimson herself were privy to secrets that her living admirers could only guess at. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the tall windows, and the gaslight from the street lamps cast wavering shadows across the gallery walls. The contrast between the warm interior and the cool, mysterious night beyond seemed to emphasize the dichotomy at the heart of the evening's events, the collision between civilized society and the darker currents that flowed beneath its polished surface. As the implications of the night's discoveries began to sink in, the gathered guests found themselves drawn into a web of questions that seemed to multiply with each attempt at answers. Who had created the forgery? How had they gained access to the gallery? What was their ultimate purpose? Simple theft, or something more complex? And perhaps most intriguingly, why had they created a copy that was so nearly perfect yet deliberately different enough to be detected by an expert eye? These questions hung in the air like incense, creating an atmosphere of intellectual tension that was both thrilling and unsettling. For in the world of art and culture, where beauty and truth were supposed to reign supreme, they had encountered something that challenged the very foundations of certainty and authenticity. The night was far from over, and already it was clear that before morning came, they would all be drawn deeper into a mystery that would test not only their knowledge and expertise, but their understanding of human nature itself. For at the heart of every great art forgery lay not just technical skill, but psychological insight, the ability to understand not just how a master artist worked, but how those who would judge the work would see and respond to it. And in the warm, golden light of the Beaumont Gallery, surrounded by the quiet luxury of London's art world, Hercule Poirot found himself once again in the presence of a puzzle that would require all his considerable skills to unravel. The lady in crimson watched over them all with her painted smile, keeping her secrets close, while the detective began the careful process of separating truth from deception, reality from illusion, and genuine artistry from its most sophisticated counterfeit. The clock in the corner of the gallery chimed softly, its melodious notes floating through the hushed space like drops of liquid silver. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and the evening's revelations had transformed what should have been a celebration of art's resurrection into something far more complex and mysterious. The gentle murmur of conversation had taken on a different quality now, hushed, intense, filled with the kind of speculation that accompanies the discovery of the impossible. Poirot moved slowly around the perimeter of the gathered crowd, his trained eyes cataloguing every detail, every gesture, every fleeting expression that might provide a clue to the evening's extraordinary puzzle. His small, precise steps made no sound on the thick carpets, and he seemed to blend into the shadows between the paintings like a benevolent ghost, observing without being observed. As he watched, he noticed that Sarah Mitchell had moved closer to Marcus Grayson, her young face creased with concern. She spoke in whispers, her words barely audible even to Poirot's acute hearing, but he caught fragments. Insurance, liability. What do we tell the board? The practical concerns of a business facing a crisis that could destroy its reputation. Meanwhile, Professor Whitmore had produced a small magnifying glass from his vest pocket and was examining the painting with the methodical precision of a scientist studying a rare specimen. His movements were slow and deliberate, each observation carefully considered before he moved to the next detail. Occasionally he would nod to himself or make a small sound of professional interest, but his expression grew increasingly grave with each passing minute. Lady Catherine stood slightly apart from the others, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold despite the gallery's comfortable warmth. The discovery that her expert assessment might have been wrong, or worse, that the painting had been changed without her knowledge, had shaken her to her core. In the art world, reputation was everything, and the suggestion that she could not distinguish between an original and even the most masterful forgery carried implications that went far beyond tonight's mystery. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, creating a gentle percussion that seemed to underscore the tension within the gallery. The sound was oddly comforting, like a lullaby played on distant drums, reminding everyone present that beyond these walls, the world continued its ancient patterns, while they grappled with mysteries that challenged everything they thought they knew about art and authenticity. Antoinette Dubois had positioned herself near one of the tall windows, her silhouette elegant against the rain-streaked glass. She appeared to be studying her reflection, but Poirot's experienced eye caught the subtle movements that suggested she was actually using the window's surface as a mirror to observe the room behind her. It was a technique he had seen employed by those who lived by watching and being watched, and it added another layer to his growing assessment of this intriguing woman. Sir Reginald approached Poirot with the careful gait of a man deep in thought. His earlier joviality had been replaced by something more serious, the kind of expression that came to those who suddenly found themselves at the centre of events beyond their control. "Poirot," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of old friendship and new worry. "I must confess this evening has taken a turn I never anticipated. When I invited you tonight, it was simply to share in the celebration of a masterpiece restored to the world. Now, ... As she spoke, Poirot noticed the subtle changes in the room's atmosphere. Sarah Mitchell had gone very still, her earlier nervous energy replaced by what might have been fear. Marcus Grayson's hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his champagne glass, though whether from anger or anxiety was impossible to determine. Even Sir Reginald seemed to have aged in the space of a few minutes, the weight of the evening's discoveries pressing down upon his distinguished shoulders. The rain outside had intensified, its rhythmic drumming against the windows creating a counterpoint to the tension within the gallery. The warm golden light that had seemed so welcoming earlier now felt somehow artificial, as if it were a stage lighting designed to illuminate a performance whose true nature was only now becoming clear. "If this Le Chameleon is real," Lady Catherine said slowly, her academic training reasserting itself despite the extraordinary circumstances, "then we're not dealing with a simple theft. Creating a forgery of this quality, with such attention to detail and historical accuracy, would require months of preparation. This would be a planned operation of considerable sophistication." "But what would be the purpose?" Sir Reginald asked, his voice carrying the bewilderment of a man whose orderly world had suddenly become chaotic. "If the forgery is so perfect that it could fool expert examination, why reveal its true nature through subtle differences? Why not simply steal the original and replace it with the copy permanently?" It was an excellent question, and one that had been troubling Poirot since Lady Catherine's first observation about the painting's altered details. In his experience, criminals rarely made their deceptions more difficult than necessary. If Le Chameleon, assuming he existed, had created a perfect replica, why compromise it with detectable variations? "Perhaps," Poirot said thoughtfully, "the purpose is not simple theft, but something more, how do you say, psychological, a demonstration of skill, a challenge to the experts, a game played for its own sake rather than mere profit." As he spoke, he was watching the faces around him, noting the various reactions to his words. Professor Whitmore nodded thoughtfully, his academic mind appreciating the psychological complexity of such a motive. Lady Catherine frowned, perhaps troubled by the suggestion that her expertise had been deliberately tested and found wanting. Marcus Grayson looked increasingly distressed, the implications for his gallery's reputation becoming ever more apparent. But it was Antoinette Dubois whose reaction most interested Poirot. For just a moment, when he spoke of psychological games and challenges to expertise, something flickered across her features, recognition, perhaps, or approval. It was gone so quickly that anyone else might have missed it, but to Poirot's trained eye, it suggested depths that warranted further exploration. The clock chimed again, marking the half-hour, and Sarah Mitchell approached Marcus Grayson with visible reluctance. "Mr. Grayson," she said quietly, "I hate to interrupt, but we need to consider our options. The insurance company will need to be notified, and if there's any possibility that we're displaying a forgery—" Grayson nodded grimly. The practical considerations were beginning to intrude upon the intellectual fascination of the mystery. If the painting was indeed a forgery, the gallery faced potential legal liability, insurance claims, and damage to its reputation that could take years to repair. "Of course," he said, though his voice carried the weight of a man making decisions he wished he didn't have to make. "We'll need to close the exhibition immediately, secure the painting, and contact the authorities." But Professor Whitmore raised a gentle hand in protest. "If I might suggest, Mr. Grayson, perhaps we should not be too hasty. While the evidence certainly suggests irregularities, we have not yet definitively proven that the painting is a forgery. The hidden mark could have explanations other than criminal activity. It's possible that this is indeed the original Rossetti, and that the symbol was added at some point in its history for reasons we don't yet understand." Lady Catherine nodded reluctantly. "Professor Whitmore raises a valid point. My observations about the altered details could theoretically be explained by factors other than substitution, changes in humidity, temperature, even the psychological effects of different lighting conditions. While I trust my expertise, I must acknowledge that human perception can be fallible under extraordinary circumstances." Her words carried the weight of professional integrity, but Poirot could see that they cost her considerable effort to speak. For an expert of her calibre to publicly question her own observations required tremendous intellectual honesty and personal courage. The morning came to the Loire Valley like a gentle blessing, with mist rising from the river and sunlight filtering through the leaves of ancient oaks to dapple the gardens in patterns of gold and green. Poirot woke in his comfortable guest room to the sound of birds greeting the dawn and the distant chiming of church bells from the village below. After a breakfast of café au lait and fresh croissants served on the terrace overlooking the river, he set out for his first interview of the day. Dr. Moreau's house stood on the main street of the village, its shutters painted the soft blue-green that was traditional to the region. The doctor himself was a man of perhaps 60 years, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the unhurried manner of one who had spent his life attending to the rhythms of rural existence. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Moreau said, as he welcomed the detective into his consulting room. "Madame Dubois mentioned that you would be coming. A terrible business, this. Henri was not just my patient, but my friend. We played chess together every Tuesday evening for 15 years. The consulting room was a sanctuary of medical tradition, with glass-fronted cabinets displaying bottles and instruments that spoke of a practice rooted in both science and compassion. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits." "Tell me, Doctor," Poirot said, settling into the chair offered to him, "about Henri Dubois' final illness. Was his death truly as sudden as it appeared?" Dr. Moreau removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully before answering. Henri had been complaining of chest pains for several weeks before his death. Heart disease, while not uncommon in men of his age, can be unpredictable. I prescribed rest, a moderate diet, and warned him against overexertion. "Yet you had concerns," Poirot prompted gently. The doctor replaced his spectacles and looked directly at his visitor. "Not concerns exactly, but curiosities. Henri's symptoms were consistent with heart disease, yes, but they came on quite suddenly for a man who had previously enjoyed robust health. And there were other things. Such as? His general demeanour had changed markedly in the weeks before his death. Henri had always been a man of steady nerves, practical and level-headed, but in his final weeks he seemed agitated, almost fearful. He asked me several times about various medications, their effects, their interactions. It was unusual for him to take such interest in pharmaceutical matters. The morning sun had risen higher now, filling the room with warm light that made everything seem peaceful and normal. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, Poirot sensed the presence of something darker, like a shadow cast by unseen clouds. Did Monsieur Dubois ever mention receiving visitors? A gentleman with silver hair and a beard? Dr. Moreau's expression grew thoughtful. No, not directly, but I do remember one particular visit, perhaps 2 weeks before his death, when Henri seemed unusually distressed. He kept checking his watch, as if expecting someone, and he asked me quite pointedly about the detection of various substances in the blood. When I asked if he suspected he might have been poisoned, he laughed it off, but the laugh was not convincing. The word poisoned hung in the air between them like an accusation. Poirot had suspected that Henri Dubois' death might not have been as natural as it appeared, but hearing the possibility voiced by the family physician gave weight to his suspicions. "In your professional opinion, Doctor, could Henri Dubois have been murdered?" The question was direct, unavoidable, and Dr. Moreau considered it with the gravity it deserved. The symptoms he displayed could certainly have been caused by certain toxins, particularly those that affect the heart. But without a proper post-mortem examination, and the family declined one, accepting the death as natural, it would be impossible to say with certainty. Poirot thanked the doctor for his time and candour, promising to keep their conversation in confidence until the investigation was complete. As he walked back through the village toward the chateau, his mind turned over the new information like a scholar examining an ancient text for hidden meanings. The village itself seemed to drown in the morning sunlight, with market vendors setting up their stalls beneath plane trees whose leaves rustled with the promise of another warm day. The scent of fresh bread from the boulangerie mingled with the perfume of flowers from window boxes, creating an atmosphere of rural contentment that seemed at odds with the dark currents of suspicion that were beginning to swirl around the Dubois family. His next interview was with Maître Rousseau, the family notary, whose office occupied the second floor of a medieval building in Tours. The drive through the French countryside was a meditation on beauty and time, with vineyards stretching toward distant hills and ancient churches marking villages that had changed little since the days of kings and queens. Maître Rousseau proved to be a precise man, with the careful demeanour of someone who had spent his life dealing with the complexities of property and inheritance. His office, lined with legal volumes and filing cabinets, spoke of a practice built on discretion and attention to detail. The will was most unusual, Rousseau admitted after Poirot had explained his mission. Monsieur Dubois had consulted with me on estate matters for many years, and his previous will was quite conventional. Everything to his wife, with provisions for the children upon her death. But this final will... The notary opened a file and spread several documents across his desk. He came to me in March, insisting that his will needed to be changed immediately. He seemed agitated, distracted, not at all like his usual calm self, and the provisions he wanted to include were so contrary to everything we had discussed previously. "The Belmont Foundation," Poirot murmured. "You had never heard of this organisation before." "Never." And when I asked Monsieur Dubois about it, he became evasive. He said only that it was a charitable organisation dedicated to preserving French heritage, and that leaving the estate to this foundation would ensure the chateau remained in good hands for generations to come. Poirot studied the will carefully, his trained eye noting not just its contents, but the circumstances of its creation. "Did Monsieur Dubois draft this will himself, or did you prepare it based on his instructions?" "That is what made the situation even more unusual," Rousseau replied. "Normally I would prepare any document based on a client's wishes, but in this case, Monsieur Dubois arrived with the will already prepared, asking only that I review it for legal adequacy and arrange for proper witnessing." "You have no idea who might have prepared the original document?" "None whatsoever. The legal language was correct, but it was not typical of my practice. There were phrases and formulations that suggested someone else's hand, someone well versed in estate law but with a different style than my own. The implications were troubling. If Henri Dubois had not drafted his own will, and if his regular notary had not prepared it, then someone else had been involved in its creation, someone with both legal expertise and a vested interest in the unusual provisions it contained. As Poirot drove back to the chateau that afternoon, the mystery seemed to deepen with each new piece of information. The mysterious visitor, the destroyed documents, the sudden change in Henri's demeanour, the suspicion of poisoning, and now a will that appeared to have been drafted by unknown hands, all pointed to a complex conspiracy designed to separate the Dubois family from their inheritance. The chateau welcomed him back with the warm embrace of late afternoon sunlight on ancient stone. In the gardens, Philippe was painting at an easel set up beneath an apple tree, his attention focused on capturing the interplay of light and shadow on the facade of his ancestral home. The sight was peaceful, domestic, a reminder that behind all mysteries lay human lives with their simple desires for beauty, security, and love. "How is the investigation?" Philippe asked, setting down his brush as Poirot approached. "It progresses," the detective replied diplomatically. "Your father, I believe, was the victim of a carefully orchestrated deception, but the full scope of that deception is only beginning to emerge." Philippe's painting showed the chateau as it appeared in that golden hour when the sun transformed its limestone walls into honey-coloured dreams. Yet there was something in the artist's interpretation that spoke of impermanence, as if the building itself were dissolving into light and time. As the group wrestled with these considerations, a new voice joined the conversation, one that carried the authority of practical experience and official concern. "I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen, but I believe I might have some information relevant to your discussion." They turned to see a tall, heavy-set man in the uniform of a security guard approaching from the gallery's entrance. This was obviously Thompson, the guard Sarah Mitchell had mentioned earlier, and his expression carried the gravity of someone bearing important news. Marcus Grayson hurried to meet him. "Thompson, thank God. Sarah mentioned you'd found something unusual about the security recordings." Thompson nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. "That I have, Mr. Grayson, though I'm not sure you're going to like what I've discovered. That 15-minute gap I mentioned, it wasn't a malfunction." The silence that greeted his words was profound, broken only by the gentle patter of rain and the soft tick of the gallery's antique clock. The implications of what he was suggesting sent a chill through the assembled group that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "What do you mean, Thompson?" Sir Reginald asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I mean the cameras were deliberately disabled, sir. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing accessed the security system and created that gap. No random malfunction could have affected all 6 cameras simultaneously, while leaving the rest of the system functioning normally." Marcus Grayson's face went pale. "But that would require detailed knowledge of our security protocols' access codes." "Exactly, sir. This was an inside job, or at least someone with inside information." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming the gallery from a place of culture and beauty into a potential crime scene. The warm golden light seemed suddenly harsh, the shadows between the paintings deeper and more threatening. Everyone present found themselves looking at their companions with new eyes, wondering who among them might possess the knowledge and opportunity to orchestrate such a sophisticated deception. Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding attention despite the shocking nature of Thompson's revelation. "Monsieur Thompson," he said courteously, "you have obviously examined the security records with great care. Tell me, during this 15-minute gap, was there any evidence of physical intrusion? Broken locks, disturbed alarms, anything that might indicate how access was gained?" Thompson shook his head. "Nothing, sir. Whoever did this had legitimate access. Keys, alarm codes, the works. They walked in like they owned the place, did whatever they did, and left without triggering so much as a door sensor." The implications were staggering. Not only had someone created a perfect forgery of the Lady in Crimson, but they had also orchestrated its substitution with the kind of access and knowledge that suggested intimate familiarity with the gallery's operations. The pool of possible suspects suddenly became very small indeed. As if reading his thoughts, Antoinette Dubois spoke with quiet intensity. "In my experience, such operations require not just one person, but a team. An artist capable of creating the forgery, someone with the technical skills to disable security systems, an individual with inside knowledge of the gallery's procedures, and perhaps others to provide funding, transportation, and coordination." Her words painted a picture of criminal sophistication that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. The group found themselves confronting the possibility that they were dealing not with a single, motivated individual, but with an organised conspiracy of considerable skill and resources. Professor Whitmore stroked his magnificent beard thoughtfully. If such a conspiracy exists, then tonight's discovery may not have been accidental. Lady Catherine's detection of the painting's alterations, the revelation of the hidden symbol, perhaps we were meant to discover these things. "But why?" Lady Catherine asked, her voice carrying a mixture of intellectual curiosity and personal concern. What possible purpose could be served by creating a perfect forgery, only to ensure its detection? It was Poirot who provided the answer, his words carrying the quiet certainty of long experience with the criminal mind. Because, mesdames et messieurs, the purpose was never simple theft. We are dealing with someone, or someone, for whom the crime itself is less important than the demonstration of their superiority over the systems and experts designed to prevent such crimes. They have created not just a forgery, but a puzzle designed to test the very limits of our knowledge and perception. As he spoke, the detective's green eyes moved systematically around the room, studying each face with the intensity of a scholar reading a complex text. Somewhere among these people, either present in the gallery or connected to them in ways not yet apparent, was the key to understanding not just how the crime had been committed, but why it had been committed in such a deliberately challenging manner. The rain outside had settled into the gentle, persistent rhythm that London knew so well, and the gallery's warmth seemed to embrace its occupants like a cocoon protecting them from the mysteries of the night. Yet within that apparent safety, currents of suspicion and uncertainty swirled like invisible storms, touching everyone present and changing the very nature of their relationships with one another. The evening had begun as a celebration of art restored to the world, but it had transformed into something far more complex, a mystery that challenged not just their knowledge of painting and forgery, but their understanding of human nature itself. And at the centre of it all, the lady in crimson continued to watch with her painted eyes, holding her secrets close while the mortals around her struggled to separate truth from deception, reality from the most sophisticated of illusions. The atmosphere in the gallery had grown thick with unspoken suspicions and half-formed theories. Each person present found themselves reassessing not only the painting before them, but also their relationships with one another. The comfortable assumptions that had governed their interactions earlier in the evening now seemed fragile as spun glass, liable to shatter at the slightest pressure of doubt or revelation. Sarah Mitchell moved closer to the windows, her young face pale in the reflected light from the street lamps outside. The rain had created intricate patterns on the glass like nature's own abstract art, and she seemed to find some comfort in watching the water's gentle dance. Yet Poirot noticed how her eyes kept returning to the group gathered around the painting, and how her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her evening dress. "Mr. Grayson," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the soft murmur of conversation. "There's something else Thompson discovered that might be relevant." All eyes turned to her, and Marcus Grayson's expression grew even more troubled. "What is it, Sarah?" She hesitated, clearly reluctant to add another layer of complexity to an already bewildering situation. "The security system logged an interesting anomaly 3 nights ago. Someone used your personal access code to enter the gallery at 2:17 in the morning. The system shows they remained inside for approximately 47 minutes. The silence that followed her words was profound, broken only by the gentle patter of rain and the soft intake of breath from several of the assembled guests. Marcus Grayson's face went from pale to ashen, and he gripped the back of a nearby chair as if needing its support. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I was at home 3 nights ago. I haven't been to the gallery after hours in months. My access code, it's known only to myself and—" He trailed off, his eyes widening as the implications became clear. If someone had used his personal code, they had either obtained it through sophisticated surveillance, bribery, or coercion, or the person responsible was someone he had trusted with that most sensitive information. Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face grave with professional concern. "Sir, I pulled the overnight logs going back 2 weeks. There were 3 other unauthorised entries, all using legitimate access codes, all during the early morning hours when the gallery was closed. Each time, the intruder stayed between 40 and 50 minutes, just long enough to study the painting in detail, perhaps to take measurements, photographs, or make preliminary sketches." Professor Whitmore stroked his magnificent beard, his scholarly mind working through the implications. Such careful preparation would be consistent with the creation of a masterful forgery. An artist would need extensive time to study every detail of the original, the texture of the brushwork, The precise colours under different lighting conditions, the way shadows fell across the painted surface. Lady Catherine nodded slowly, her earlier distress giving way to professional fascination despite the disturbing nature of the revelations. The level of detail in what we've observed tonight would indeed require such meticulous study, creating not just a visual copy, but one that could fool expert examination under magnification, that would demand intimate knowledge of every subtle variation in the original work. As they spoke, Antoinette Dubois moved away from her position near the window and approached the painting once more. Her movements were fluid and graceful, like those of a dancer, or perhaps someone accustomed to moving through spaces without drawing unwanted attention. She stood before the lady in crimson for a long moment, her dark eyes studying the painted face with an intensity that seemed almost personal. "There is something about this particular painting that troubles me," she said finally, her French accent lending a musical quality to her words. "In my work recovering stolen art, I have encountered many forgeries, some crude, some sophisticated, a few that approached brilliance. But this..." She gestured toward the canvas with a graceful movement of her gloved hand. "This transcends mere forgery. It is almost as if someone has not simply copied the painting, but has somehow channeled the original artist's very soul." Her words carried an almost mystical quality that seemed to deepen the gallery's already mysterious atmosphere. The warm golden light seemed to flicker slightly, though it might have been merely the effect of automobile headlights passing in the street outside, their beams catching the rain-slicked windows and casting shifting patterns across the interior walls. Sir Reginald approached Poirot with the measured steps of a man wrestling with difficult decisions. His distinguished features were etched with lines of worry and confusion, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal responsibility. "Poirot, as the person who arranged for the painting's exhibition here, I feel I must take some responsibility for what has occurred. When the anonymous collector first approached me through intermediaries, offering to lend the painting for public display, I was so thrilled by the possibility of sharing such a treasure with the world that I perhaps did not ask as many questions as I should have." Poirot tilted his head slightly, his green eyes reflecting the kind of patient attention that encouraged confidence. "Tell me about these intermediaries, mon ami. What can you recall of their approach, their manner of speaking, their specific requests?" Sir Reginald paused, his memory clearly working to reconstruct details that had seemed unimportant at the time, but now carried potential significance. The initial contact came through Pemberton, Ashworth and Associates, a highly respected firm of art dealers in Geneva. They represented themselves as acting on behalf of a private collector who wished to remain anonymous but who desired to share certain treasures with the public on selected occasions. "And you found nothing unusual in such an arrangement?" "Not at all. Anonymous lending is quite common in our world. Many collectors prefer to avoid the publicity and potential security risks that come with being known to possess valuable works. The legal documentation was impeccable, the insurance arrangements comprehensive, everything appeared entirely legitimate." As Sir Reginald spoke, Poirot noticed that Antoinette Dubois had moved closer, her attention apparently focused on the conversation. There was something in her posture, a subtle tensing of her shoulders perhaps, or the way her fingers had tightened almost imperceptibly around her evening bag, that suggested the mention of the Geneva firm had particular significance for her. "This firm in Geneva," Poirot continued casually, "have you dealt with them previously?" "Oh yes, on several occasions over the years. They have an excellent reputation, connections throughout Europe's art world. Charles Pemberton himself is a man of impeccable standing, Oxford educated, served with distinction during the war, member of several professional associations." The detective filed this information away carefully, but his attention was increasingly drawn to the subtle reactions of those around him. Sarah Mitchell had grown very still at the mention of Geneva, her earlier nervous energy replaced by something that might have been recognition or concern. Even Marcus Grayson seemed to be listening with more than casual interest, his eyes fixed on Sir Reginald's face with an intensity that suggested personal stakes in the information being shared. Professor Whitmore had returned to his examination of the painting, but Poirot noticed that his scholarly attention seemed forced as if he were using the academic exercise to avoid participating in the conversation about the painting's origins. The elderly scholar's hands, Poirot observed, showed a slight tremor that had not been present earlier in the evening, a sign of stress or anxiety that his calm demeanour was attempting to conceal. The rain outside had settled into the kind of gentle, persistent shower that London knew so well, creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to insulate the gallery from the outside world. The combination of warm interior light and the cool, grey atmosphere visible through the tall windows created a sense of intimate enclosure, as if the small group were actors on a stage set apart from ordinary reality. "There is another possibility we have not yet considered," Poirot said quietly, his words carrying easily in the hushed gallery. "What if the painting we are examining is not a forgery of the Lady in Crimson, but rather, the Lady in Crimson is a forgery of this painting?" The suggestion hung in the air like a discordant note in a symphony, beautiful yet somehow wrong. The implications were staggering. If the painting thought to have been destroyed in the fire at Lord Pemberton's estate had actually been a forgery, and this was the original work, then everything they thought they knew about the case would be turned upside down. Lady Catherine turned to stare at Poirot, her expert mind immediately grappling with the ramifications of his suggestion. "You're proposing that the painting destroyed 15 years ago was itself not genuine, that Lord Pemberton unknowingly possessed a forgery, while the real Lady in Crimson survived elsewhere. It is a theory worth considering, is it not? If someone had created a masterful forgery of the original Rossetti, and somehow substituted it for the genuine work in Lord Pemberton's collection, then the loss in the fire would have been tragic but not devastating to the art world. The real painting would have remained safely in other hands." Professor Whitmore looked up from his examination, his eyes bright with the intellectual excitement that came from considering revolutionary possibilities. "Such a scenario would explain certain anomalies I've noticed in the historical documentation. The insurance photographs taken of Lord Pemberton's collection show the Lady in Crimson, but the resolution is too poor to reveal the kind of subtle details we're examining tonight. If those photographs actually documented a forgery rather than the original, then the presence of the hidden symbol, the subtle variations in brushwork that Lady Catherine detected, these would not be signs of contemporary forgery, but rather evidence that this is the genuine article, bearing authentic details that were not perfectly replicated in the copy that was later destroyed," Antoinette finished, her voice carrying a note of admiration for the theory's elegant complexity. Marcus Grayson looked confused, his business mind struggling to keep pace with the art historical implications being discussed. But if that were true, then what we have here is actually more valuable, not less. Why would anyone create such an elaborate deception around a painting that was already authentic and legitimate? It was an excellent question, and one that struck to the heart of the evening's central mystery. If Poirot's theory was correct, then they were dealing not with art theft in the traditional sense, but with something far more complex. A scheme that involved historical deception, long-term planning, and motives that transcended simple monetary gain. "Perhaps," Poirot suggested gently, "the deception serves purposes other than theft. Consider, if the original Lady in Crimson had been thought lost for 15 years, its sudden reappearance would generate tremendous interest from collectors, museums, and art historians. Such attention would provide the perfect cover for other activities, the movement of other artworks perhaps, or the establishment of relationships with individuals who possess valuable collections." As he spoke, the detective was watching the faces around him with the careful attention of a conductor reading his orchestra. Each person's reaction to his words provided clues to their role in the evening's drama, whether as innocent bystanders, knowing participants, or something in between. Sarah Mitchell had moved away from the window and was now standing near the gallery's entrance, her position allowing her to observe both the assembled group and anyone who might approach from outside. Her young face was pale but determined, and Poirot noticed that she had positioned herself in such a way that she could reach the door quickly if the need arose. Whether this was the caution of someone fearing danger or the preparation of someone planning an escape remained to be determined. "Monsieur Thompson," Poirot said courteously, "in your years of security work you have no doubt developed excellent instincts about when situations are not quite what they seem. What does your experience tell you about tonight's events?" The older man considered the question carefully before responding, his words carrying the weight of practical wisdom earned through decades of observation. "Well, sir, I've learned that when too many unusual things happen at once, it's rarely a coincidence. The anonymous collector, the perfect timing of the exhibition, the sophisticated security breach, even the way certain people seem to know more about art forgery than might be expected in casual conversation, it all feels orchestrated, like pieces of a puzzle designed to fit together in a specific way." His words seemed to resonate with the group, providing a voice for suspicions that had been growing throughout the evening but had not been directly articulated. The suggestion that they might all be unwitting participants in someone else's carefully planned scenario added another layer of unease to an already complex situation. The clock in the corner chimed 11 o'clock, its melodious notes serving as a reminder that the evening was advancing and that decisions would soon need to be made about how to proceed. The warm, intimate atmosphere of the gallery seemed to pulse gently with the accumulated weight of revelations and theories, creating a sense of suspended time in which ordinary rules and expectations might not apply. Antoinette Dubois approached Poirot with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality of confidential intimacy that suggested she was sharing information of particular significance. "Monsieur Poirot, if I may speak with you privately for a moment, there are certain aspects of this situation that might benefit from specialized knowledge." The detective nodded courteously, and they moved to a corner of the gallery where a cluster of smaller paintings created a natural alcove. The soft lighting there was slightly dimmer, creating an atmosphere of privacy within the larger space. "You have observed something specific, mademoiselle?" "Several things, actually. The hidden symbol we discovered, the rose, is indeed associated with Le Chameleon, but not in the way Professor Whitmore suggested. In the circles where I work, that particular mark is known to indicate not a forgery, but rather a work of art that has been liberated from an inappropriate situation and returned to its proper place in the world." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly at this revelation. "You are suggesting that Le Chameleon is not merely a forger, but someone who recovers stolen or improperly held artwork." "Exactly. If the theories we've discussed tonight are correct, if the painting destroyed in Lord Pemberton's fire was indeed a forgery, and this is the original, then Le Chameleon may have spent years planning not to steal the lady in crimson, but to restore her to public view where she belongs." The implications of Antoinette's words were profound, transforming the evening's mystery from a simple case of art theft into something approaching justice, albeit justice administered through illegal means. If her assessment was accurate, then they were dealing not with common criminals, but with individuals who saw themselves as correctors of historical wrongs. "And you believe this because?" Poirot prompted gently. Antoinette was quiet for a moment, and in that pause the detective sensed the careful calculation of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. "Because, Monsieur Poirot, I have reason to believe that I am not the only person in this room who knows more about Le Chameleon than they have admitted." Her words sent a chill through the warm gallery air, carrying implications that extended far beyond the immediate mystery of the painting. If multiple people present possessed undisclosed knowledge about the mysterious forger and his methods, then the evening's events were indeed part of a larger design, one that might have been years in the making. As they rejoined the main group, Poirot found himself viewing each person with fresh eyes, searching for signs of the specialized knowledge Antoinette had suggested. The gentle murmur of conversation continued, punctuated by the soft patter of rain and the occasional distant sound of motor cars passing in the street below. Yet beneath this veneer of civilized discussion, currents of tension and uncertainty continued to build like pressure in a steam engine approaching the critical point. The lady in crimson watched over them all with her painted smile, her eyes holding secrets that seemed to deepen rather than diminish as the evening progressed. In the warm golden light of the gallery, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of centuries of human creativity, the small group continued their careful dance of revelation and concealment, each person guarding their own mysteries, while seeking to uncover those of others. The night was far from over, and already it was clear that before dawn broke over London's ancient streets, truths would be revealed that would change not only their understanding of the painting before them, but their relationships with one another. For in the world of art and deception, where beauty and truth were the ultimate currencies, every revelation carried the potential to transform understanding in ways both wonderful and dangerous. And in the gentle light of the Beaumont Gallery, as the rain continued its soft percussion against the tall windows, Hercule Poirot prepared himself for the careful unravelling of what promised to be one of the most complex and psychologically intricate cases of his distinguished career. The clock struck the 11:15, its chimes floating through the gallery like drops of liquid music. The sound seemed to awaken something in the assembled group, a recognition that the night had reached a turning point, a moment when passive observation must give way to active investigation. The warm golden light that bathed the painting seemed to pulse gently with each tick of the clock, as if time itself had become part of the mystery unfolding within these elegant walls. Poirot moved to the centre of the room with the measured grace of a conductor, preparing to lead his orchestra through a complex symphony. His small, precise figure commanded attention despite its modest stature, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of one accustomed to being heard and believed. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his accent lending a musical quality to the words, "we find ourselves this evening in the presence of mysteries within mysteries. A painting thought lost has returned to us, only to vanish again, not physically, but in terms of its very identity. What we believe to be genuine reveals signs of deception, yet what we suspect to be false bears marks of authenticity." As he spoke, the detective's green eyes moved systematically around the room, noting the way each person held themselves, the subtle shifts in posture that revealed states of mind more clearly than words. Sarah Mitchell had positioned herself near the gallery's entrance, her young face pale but alert. Marcus Grayson stood beside his precious painting like a guardian protecting a treasure, though whether from thieves or from the truth remained unclear. Professor Whitmore maintained his scholarly composure, but his hands showed the slight tremor that spoke of suppressed tension. "But perhaps," Poirot continued, "we have been approaching this puzzle from the wrong direction. Instead of asking whether the lady in crimson is genuine or forged, let us ask instead, what story does she wish to tell us?" Lady Catherine tilted her head slightly, her academic mind intrigued by the philosophical approach. "You're suggesting we treat the painting as if it were a witness rather than evidence. Precisement. Every work of art carries within it the story of its creation, its journey through time, the hands that have touched it, and the eyes that have gazed upon it. If we listen carefully, if we observe not just with our intellect but with our intuition, perhaps the lady will reveal her secrets to us." The suggestion seemed to resonate through the gallery like a gentle vibration, changing the quality of attention focused on the painting. Where before the assembled experts had examined it with the analytical precision of scientists studying a specimen, now they approached it with something approaching reverence, as if it were indeed a living witness capable of communication. Antoinette Dubois stepped closer to the painting, her dark eyes reflecting the golden light as she studied the painted face with renewed intensity. "There is something in her expression," she murmured, her French accent making the words sound almost like a prayer. "A quality I did not notice before, a kind of knowing sadness, as if she has witnessed events that mortals were not meant to see." Thompson, the security guard, cleared his throat respectfully. "If I might add something, sir," he addressed Poirot, "there's been something bothering me about those unauthorised entries I mentioned. The timing wasn't random. Each one occurred on nights when there were specific weather conditions." "Weather conditions?" Sir Reginald echoed, his distinguished features creased with curiosity. "Yes, sir. Each intrusion took place during heavy rain, when the sound would mask any noise from someone moving about the gallery. And each time the person stayed exactly long enough for the rain to stop, almost as if they were timing their work to the weather itself. This revelation added another layer of sophistication to the evening's puzzle. Someone had not only possessed the technical skills to bypass the gallery's security systems and the artistic ability to study the painting in minute detail, but had also demonstrated the patience and planning to coordinate their activities with London's notoriously unpredictable weather patterns. Professor Whitmore stroked his magnificent beard thoughtfully. Such attention to detail suggests someone with both criminal sophistication and an almost romantic sensibility. The idea of working only during rainstorms has a certain poetic quality. Or practical, Poirot observed mildly. Rain not only masks sound, but also affects lighting conditions, humidity levels, and the behaviour of security personnel. Someone familiar with art conservation would understand how environmental factors influence both the appearance of paintings and the optimal conditions for studying them. As if summoned by his words, the rain outside intensified slightly, its gentle drumming against the windows creating a cocoon of sound that seemed to isolate the gallery from the outside world. The contrast between the warm, golden interior and the cool, mysterious night beyond seemed to emphasize the otherworldly quality that had settled over the evening's events. Sarah Mitchell moved away from her position near the entrance and approached the group with visible reluctance. Her young face showed the strain of wrestling with some internal decision, and when she spoke, her voice carried the tremor of someone about to reveal a carefully guarded secret. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said quietly, her words barely audible above the rain. "About the night 3 evenings ago, when someone used Mr. Grayson's access code. I was here." The silence that greeted her confession was profound, broken only by the gentle patter of rain and the soft intake of breath from several of the assembled guests. Marcus Grayson turned to stare at his assistant, his face reflecting a mixture of shock, betrayal, and desperate hope for an innocent explanation. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "what do you mean you were here?" She wrapped her arms around herself as if seeking comfort, her eyes fixed on the floor as she struggled to find the words. "I couldn't sleep that night. I'd been having terrible nightmares about the gallery being robbed, about losing the painting before the exhibition could open. So I came here, around 2 a.m, just to check that everything was secure. But why didn't you tell me? Why isn't there any record of your entry in the security logs?" Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been shame. "Because I used the emergency override code instead of my regular access. I didn't want there to be a record. I thought you'd think I was being neurotic, obsessive about security." Professor Whitmore leaned forward with interest. "And when you arrived, what did you observe?" The gallery was dark except for the emergency lighting. Everything appeared normal. But when I approached the lady in crimson, I noticed that someone had been there recently. The carpet around the painting showed footprints, not obvious ones, but the kind you'd see if someone had been standing in the same spots for extended periods. "Footprints," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "And were you able to determine anything about the person who had made them?" Sarah nodded slowly. "They were small, smaller than Mr. Grayson's or Thompson's, and they suggested someone who moved very carefully, methodically. Not the quick nervous steps of a thief, but the deliberate movements of someone conducting a thorough examination." As she spoke, Poirot found himself studying the footprints currently visible around the painting, the accumulated traces of the evening's guests, overlay upon overlay of impressions in the thick carpet. Among them, he could indeed detect patterns that suggested systematic examination rather than casual observation, marks that spoke of someone who had spent considerable time studying the work from multiple angles. Antoinette Dubois had been listening to Sarah's confession with the intense attention of someone hearing confirmation of suspected truths. Now she moved closer to the young woman, her voice carrying a quality of gentle understanding. "You were frightened by what you found, weren't you? Not just the evidence that someone had been there, but something else. Something that made you realise this situation was more complex than a simple security breach." Sarah looked up at her with eyes that held the vulnerability of someone whose carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. "Yes," she whispered, "because when I examined the painting more closely, trying to see if it had been damaged or tampered with, I noticed something that shouldn't have been there." The group waited in suspended silence, the very air seeming to thicken with anticipation. Outside, the rain had settled into the steady rhythm that Londoners knew could continue for hours, creating a sense of temporal suspension as if the gallery existed outside the normal flow of time. "What did you notice, Sarah?" Marcus Grayson asked gently, his earlier shock giving way to professional concern. "A small mark in the lower right corner, so tiny I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking so carefully. It appeared to be part of the artist's signature, but—" She paused, clearly struggling with the implications of what she was about to say. "But you had studied the painting's documentation thoroughly during the preparation for the exhibition," Lady Catherine finished, her expert mind immediately grasping the significance. "And no such mark appeared in the reference materials." "Exactly. I had memorized every detail of every photograph, every description in every scholarly paper written about the lady in crimson. This mark, this tiny rose symbol, was not part of the documented painting." Her words seemed to hang in the air like incense, carrying implications that extended far beyond their immediate meaning. If Sarah's observation was accurate, then the painting's mysterious alterations had been present for at least 3 days, and possibly longer. The question of when and how the changes had been made became even more complex. Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face grave with professional concern. "Miss Mitchell, did you report this observation to anyone? Did you document what you found?" Sarah shook her head miserably. "I convinced myself I was imagining things, that the stress of preparing for such an important exhibition was affecting my judgment. I didn't want to raise concerns that might delay the opening, especially based on something so subtle that I couldn't be certain of what I'd seen." The admission revealed the kind of psychological pressure that often complicated art world investigations. The desire to avoid false alarms, to maintain professional credibility, and to preserve important exhibitions could create an environment where legitimate concerns were suppressed until it was too late to address them effectively. Poirot moved closer to the painting, his trained eyes studying it with the intensity of a scholar reading a sacred text. "Mademoiselle Sarah, you have provided us with information of great value, but now I must ask. During your examination that night, did you observe anything else unusual? Any other signs that someone with specialized knowledge had been studying the work?" She considered the question carefully, her memory clearly working to reconstruct details that had seemed unimportant at the time, but now carried potential significance. "There was something," she said slowly. "Near the painting's frame, I found a small piece of what looked like artist's charcoal, the kind used for detailed sketching. It was so tiny I almost missed it, and I assumed it had fallen from one of the other artworks during installation." "Charcoal," Professor Whitmore mused. "That would be consistent with someone making detailed studies of the painting's composition and technique. An artist preparing to create a replica would need to understand not just the visual appearance, but the underlying structure, the way shadows were built up, how colours were layered, the precise angles of each brushstroke." The revelation of the charcoal fragment provided another piece of the puzzle, suggesting that the mysterious nocturnal visitor had indeed been conducting the kind of systematic study necessary for creating a masterful forgery. Yet questions remained about the timing, the purpose, and the ultimate destination of such a replica. As the group absorbed these new revelations, the atmosphere in the gallery seemed to shift once again. The warm golden light that had seemed so welcoming earlier now felt almost conspiratorial, as if it were illuminating secrets that were meant to remain hidden. The shadows between the paintings appeared deeper, more mysterious, pregnant with possibilities that the rational mind struggled to accept. Sir Reginald approached Poirot with the measured steps of a man carrying heavy responsibilities. His distinguished features showed the strain of the evening's events, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal accountability. "Poirot, I must ask your professional opinion. Given what we've learned tonight, what do you believe has actually occurred here? Are we dealing with theft, forgery, or something else entirely?" The detective was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes moving systematically around the room as he synthesized the evening's revelations into a coherent understanding. When he finally spoke, his words carried the quiet certainty of a long experience with the criminal mind. "Mon ami, I believe we are dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple theft or forgery. We are witnessing the culmination of a plan that has been years in the making. A plan that involves not just the movement of valuable artwork, but the manipulation of perception itself. He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the hushed gallery before continuing. Consider, if someone wished to steal the Lady in Crimson, they would simply take it and disappear. If they wished to replace it with a forgery for profit, they would create a copy indistinguishable from the original. But what we have observed tonight suggests neither of these motives. Lady Catherine leaned forward with professional interest. Then what do you believe the true purpose has been? I believe, Poirot said carefully, that we have been participants in an elaborate test, a demonstration designed to reveal the limitations of even the most expert knowledge and the most sophisticated security systems. The person or persons responsible have created not just a technical challenge, but a psychological one, forcing us to question our most fundamental assumptions about authenticity and deception. As he spoke, the detective noticed subtle changes in the postures and expressions of those around him. Some faces showed the dawning recognition of truth, while others revealed the kind of careful composure that came from guarding secrets. The interplay of revelation and concealment continued its delicate dance, each new understanding casting light on some mysteries while deepening others. Antoinette Dubois moved to stand directly before the painting, her elegant silhouette framed against the golden light. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality of quiet revelation that seemed to emanate from the depths of long-held knowledge. Monsieur Poirot speaks with great wisdom, she said softly. There are indeed forces at work here that transcend simple criminal motives. In my years of working in specialized recovery, I have encountered individuals whose relationship with art goes far beyond mere possession or profit. She turned to face the group, and in her eyes was a depth of understanding that suggested intimate familiarity with the shadowy world she described. There exists a small, secretive community of individuals who see themselves as guardians of art history, people who believe that great works should be accessible to those capable of truly appreciating them, regardless of legal ownership or institutional control. They operate according to principles that most would consider criminal, yet their ultimate goal is not personal gain but cultural preservation. Her words painted a picture of a shadow world operating parallel to the legitimate art market, a realm where masterpieces moved according to rules of aesthetics and cultural value rather than simple ownership. The implications were both fascinating and deeply unsettling, suggesting that the evening's events might be part of a larger crusade being waged in galleries and private collections around the world. Thompson cleared his throat respectfully. Begging your pardon, miss, but are you suggesting that this Le Chameleon fellow might be part of such a group? Antoinette smiled, and the expression transformed her features with a mixture of mystery and mischief. I am suggesting, Monsieur Thompson, that the line between criminal and crusader is sometimes thinner than we might wish to believe. The rain outside had begun to lighten, its steady percussion giving way to the gentler patter that often preceded the clearing of London's evening storms. The change in weather seemed to correspond with a shift in the gallery's atmosphere, as if the approaching end of the rain signalled the approaching resolution of the evening's mysteries. Professor Whitmore had been studying the painting throughout the recent revelations, his scholarly attention apparently focused on technical details. Now he looked up with the expression of someone who had reached a significant conclusion. I have been examining the brushwork more closely, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of decades of expertise, and I have discovered something that changes my understanding of this entire situation. The group turned to him with renewed attention, sensing that his words might provide the key to unraveling the evening's complex puzzle. The painting we see before us, he continued, his words measured and precise, is unquestionably the work of Giovanni Rossetti. Every technique, every stylistic element, every subtle detail of execution bears the unmistakable mark of the master's hand. But, because, ma petite, the legitimate art world is not always as legitimate as it appears. During the war, during times of social upheaval, many works of art were displaced. Families lost treasures, collections were scattered, ownership became a matter of force rather than right. Even with perfect documentation, even with undeniable provenance, questions can be raised, claims can be made, Legal battles can consume years and drain resources. Her words painted a picture of a shadow world where beauty and culture existed alongside politics and power, where the appreciation of art could become entangled with the darker currents of human nature. The decision to display the painting anonymously, she suggested, had been motivated not by criminal intent but by the desire to share its beauty while protecting it from the complications that could arise from its revelation. Professor Whitmore nodded slowly, his academic understanding encompassing the historical context of Antoinette's concerns. Such caution would be entirely reasonable, given the complexities of art ownership in the modern era. Many collectors prefer anonymity precisely to avoid the kind of scrutiny that can transform private appreciation into public controversy. Thompson, the security guard, cleared his throat respectfully. But what about those unauthorized entries? If the painting's presence here was legitimate, why the need for secretive examination? It was Poirot who answered, his detective's mind having synthesized the evening's revelations into a coherent understanding of events. Because Monsieur Thompson, Mademoiselle Antoinette and her associates needed to ensure that their precious family treasure would be properly appreciated and protected during its public display. The nocturnal visits were not preparation for theft, but rather careful assessment to ensure that the gallery's security, environmental controls and display conditions were adequate for such a valuable work. As he spoke, the final pieces of the evening's puzzle began to fall into place. The sophisticated security bypass had been achieved not through criminal expertise, but through legitimate connections within the art world. The careful timing with weather conditions reflected not criminal paranoia, but the deep understanding of environmental factors that came from decades of art conservation. Even the mysterious Le Chameleon began to make sense, not as a criminal mastermind, but as a guardian figure, protecting valuable works through methods that operated outside conventional legal frameworks. The rain had stopped entirely now, and through the tall windows the first hints of clearing sky were visible. The change in weather seemed to correspond with the resolution of the evening's mysteries, as if nature itself had been waiting for truth to emerge before allowing the storm to pass. Sir Reginald approached Antoinette with the formal courtesy that characterized his every interaction, yet his eyes held warmth and understanding. "Mademoiselle, if what you have told us is true, and I have every reason to believe it is, then you have given the world a remarkable gift. To share such a personal treasure, to allow others to appreciate the beauty that your family has protected for generations. It is an act of extraordinary generosity." Antoinette's response carried the quiet dignity of someone who had made difficult decisions for the right reasons. "Art is meant to be appreciated, monsieur. Beauty that is hidden serves no one. Not the artist who created it, not the model who inspired it, not the world that could be enriched by experiencing it. My grandmother would have wanted her portrait to bring joy to others, not to remain locked away in private rooms where only a few could see it." Lady Catherine stepped forward, her expert mind still grappling with the technical implications of the evening's discoveries. "But the alterations we detected, the subtle differences in brushwork, the hidden symbol, how do you explain these variations from the documented characteristics of the original?" "Because," Professor Whitmore interjected with scholarly excitement, "we were not comparing this painting to its twin, but to photographic documentation and written descriptions that were themselves imperfect. The subtle differences we observed were not signs of forgery, but evidence of authenticity, details that could only be captured through direct examination of the actual work." The explanation provided the final resolution to the evening's central puzzle. What had appeared to be evidence of deception was actually proof of genuineness. The kind of subtle, irreproducible details that separated authentic masterworks from even the most skillful copies. Marcus Grayson looked around the gallery with the expression of someone seeing his familiar surroundings in an entirely new light. "So we have not been the victims of an elaborate deception, but rather the beneficiaries of an extraordinary trust. The anonymous collector who arranged for the painting's display was protecting not just a valuable artwork, but a piece of personal and cultural history." "Indeed," Poirot confirmed, his green eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a mystery elegantly resolved. And the various individuals we suspected of harbouring secrets were actually guardians, ensuring that this remarkable work received the protection and appreciation it deserved. As the truth settled over the assembled group, the atmosphere in the gallery underwent another transformation. The tension and suspicion that had characterised much of the evening gave way to something approaching reverence, a shared recognition that they had been privileged to participate in the revelation of something truly extraordinary. The lady in crimson watched over them all with her painted smile, her secrets finally revealed, yet somehow even more mysterious than before. For now they knew not just what she was, but who she had been. A real woman whose beauty had inspired artistic genius, whose image had survived across centuries to bring wonder to new generations of admirers. Thompson moved to check the gallery's security systems, his professional instincts ensuring that the evening's revelations would not compromise the painting's protection. Sarah Mitchell began making notes about the changes that would need to be made to the exhibition's documentation, her earlier distress replaced by the excitement of being part of art historical discovery. As the group began to disperse, some heading toward the gallery's exit and others lingering to take final looks at the remarkable painting, Poirot found himself approached by Antoinette Dubois. She moved with her characteristic grace, but now there was something different in her manner, a quality of completion, as if a long-carried burden had finally been set down. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I must thank you for your discretion tonight. A lesser detective might have approached this situation with suspicion and accusation rather than patience and understanding." "Mademoiselle," he replied with courtly courtesy, "in my experience the truth is best served not by force, but by careful observation and gentle persistence. Tonight's revelations have enriched us all, not just with knowledge of a remarkable artwork, but with understanding of the complex motivations that drive those who truly love art." She smiled, and the expression carried depths of gratitude and relief that spoke to the months, or perhaps years, of careful planning that had led to this moment. "My grandmother would have been pleased," she said, glancing back at the painting. "She always believed that beauty was meant to be shared, that art existed not for the pleasure of the few, but for the enrichment of many. Tonight, her portrait has finally found its way home, not to a private collection or a secure vault, but to the public appreciation she would have wanted." As the evening drew to its close, the gallery settled into the peaceful quiet that follows the resolution of great mysteries. The warm golden light continued to bathe the paintings in its gentle glow, but now that light seemed to carry different qualities. Not the illumination of secrets being probed and questioned, but the soft radiance of truth acknowledged and beauty appreciated. The lady in crimson remained in her place of honour, but now she was no longer an object of suspicion and uncertainty. She had become what she had always been meant to be, a bridge between past and present, between the genius of the artistic creation and the wonder of human appreciation, between the private world of family history and the public realm of cultural heritage. Outside, London's ancient streets glistened with the aftermath of rain, reflecting the gaslight and electric illumination in patterns that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the great city's eternal heartbeat. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and clean, filled with the promise of new beginnings and the satisfaction of mysteries resolved. In the Beaumont Gallery, as the last visitors prepared to depart, the painting that had been the centre of so much confusion and concern continued to watch with her enigmatic smile. She had shared her secrets at last, revealed her true nature, and found her place in the world where art and life intersected in the most beautiful and meaningful ways. And in the gentle quiet of the London night, as the clock chimed midnight, and the city settled into the peaceful rhythm of dreams, the lady in crimson kept her eternal vigil, no longer a puzzle to be solved, but a masterpiece to be treasured, a window into beauty that would continue to inspire wonder and appreciation for generations yet to come. The mystery of the vanishing masterpiece had been resolved not through the discovery of crime, but through the revelation of love of art, love of beauty, love of the connections that bind past and present in the eternal dance of human creativity and appreciation. And in that resolution, all who had participated found not just answers, but a deeper understanding of the profound ways in which art enriches and transforms the human experience. As the gentle rain began to fall once more against the gallery windows, soft as a lullaby, the lady in crimson watched over London's sleeping streets, her painted eyes holding all the secrets of beauty and time, her smile promising that some mysteries are worth preserving, some truths are worth protecting, and some stories are worth telling again and again, like whispered dreams that carry us softly towards sleep. The clock chimed the half-hour past midnight, its melodious notes floating through the gallery like drops of liquid starlight. Most of the evening's guests had departed, their footsteps echoing softly on the rain-slicked pavements outside as they made their way home through London's gaslit streets. But a small group remained, drawn by an inexplicable reluctance to leave the presence of the remarkable painting that had revealed so many secrets. Professor Whitmore stood before the lady in crimson with the reverent attention of a scholar who had witnessed history unfold before his eyes. His magnificent white beard caught the gallery's golden light as he leaned closer, studying details that would now be documented and celebrated rather than questioned and doubted. "In all my years of art scholarship," he murmured, his voice carrying the wonder of someone encountering the truly extraordinary, "I have never been privileged to witness the emergence of a lost masterpiece under such circumstances. To think that she has been waiting all these decades, protected by love and secrecy, for the right moment to step into the light." His words trailed off into contemplative silence, but the emotion behind them resonated through the hushed gallery. Lady Catherine approached to stand beside him, her earlier professional distress transformed into something approaching joy, the pure pleasure of an expert witnessing the validation of everything she had devoted her life to understanding. "The brushwork in her left hand," she observed softly, pointing to a section of the painting that seemed to glow with inner life. "See how Rossetti built up the shadows with such patience, such love. Each layer tells part of the story, not just of the woman he was painting, but of his own artistic journey, his growing mastery of techniques that would influence generations of artists to come." Their quiet conversation created a gentle counterpoint to the rain outside, which had settled into the kind of steady, comforting rhythm that Londoners knew could last until dawn. The sound seemed to wrap around the gallery like a protective blanket, insulating the precious artwork and its admirers from the practical concerns of the world beyond these walls. Marcus Grayson moved slowly through his gallery, seeing it with new eyes. The evening's revelations had transformed not just his understanding of the Lady in Crimson, but his appreciation of his entire collection. Each painting now seemed to carry the possibility of hidden stories, secret histories, connections to lives and loves that extended far beyond their frames. "Sarah," he called softly to his assistant, who was making final notes in a leather-bound journal. "Tomorrow we'll need to contact the insurance company, update our documentation, and inform the art historical societies. This discovery will require a complete revision of Rossetti scholarship." Sarah looked up from her writing, her young face bright with excitement despite the late hour. The stress and confusion that had marked her earlier revelations had given way to the kind of professional fulfillment that came from being part of something truly significant. "I've already begun drafting the preliminary reports," she replied, her voice carrying a note of pride. "Professor Whitmore has agreed to assist with the technical documentation, and Lady Catherine will be contributing to the provenance research. This will be the most thoroughly documented art discovery of the decade." Thompson made his final security rounds, his weathered hands checking locks and alarm systems with the methodical precision of decades of experience. But tonight, his routine inspection carried a different quality, not the vigilant suspicion of someone protecting against unknown threats, but the gentle care of a guardian watching over something precious and beloved. "Strange thing," he mused to Poirot as the detective prepared for his own departure. "All these years I've been protecting paintings, thinking of them as valuable objects that needed to be kept safe from thieves and vandals. Tonight I learned that sometimes the real threat isn't to the art itself, but to the stories that give it meaning. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie with characteristic precision. Indeed, mon ami. In my experience, the most valuable things are often not those with the highest price, but those with the deepest connections to human hearts and histories. As he spoke, Antoinette Dubois emerged from the shadows near the tall windows, where she had been standing in quiet contemplation of the night beyond. The rain had created intricate patterns on the glass, and she'd been watching them shift and change like living art, temporary masterpieces that nature painted and erased with each gust of wind. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her French accent lending music to the night-quiet gallery, "before you depart, I wonder if I might share with you one final detail about the painting, something that even tonight's revelations have not fully explained." The detective paused in his preparations to leave, his green eyes bright with renewed interest. In his experience, the most significant truths often emerged in these quiet moments after the main drama had concluded, when guards were lowered and hearts were opened by the intimacy of shared discovery. "But of course, mademoiselle, what is it you wish to tell me?" Antoinette moved closer to the painting, her elegant silhouette framed against the golden light that continued to bathe the lady in crimson in its warm glow. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets that had been carried across generations, stories that had been whispered from grandmother to granddaughter in the quiet hours of family intimacy. The woman in this painting, my grandmother, was not merely Rossetti's model. She was his great love, the inspiration not just for her portrait but for some of his most celebrated works. When he created this second version of her image, it was not as a commission or a commercial venture, but as a love letter, a way of capturing not just her physical beauty, but the essence of what she meant to him. Her words seemed to transform the painting before them, adding layers of meaning that went beyond artistic technique or historical significance. The Lady in Crimson became not just a masterpiece but a testament to love itself, the kind of profound connection between souls that transcends time and speaks to the universal human experience of devotion and loss. "But their love was impossible," Antoinette continued, her voice carrying the sadness of old stories that ended in separation rather than union. She was married, committed to a life that could not include him, except in these stolen moments of artistic creation. When this painting was completed, it became her way of saying goodbye, a final gift that would preserve their connection even as circumstances forced them apart. Professor Whitmore had been listening with the rapt attention of a scholar encountering new primary source material. "Such a personal history would explain the painting's remarkable emotional resonance," he observed. "When art emerges from genuine feeling rather than mere technical exercise, it carries a power that speaks directly to the viewer's heart." Lady Catherine nodded in agreement, her expert eye seeing the painting anew in light of Antoinette's revelation. The way Rossetti captured her expression, that quality of wistful longing mixed with deep contentment, makes perfect sense now. He was painting not just a woman's face, but the complex emotions of a love that was both fulfilling and impossible. As they spoke, the rain outside began to lighten once more, its steady rhythm giving way to gentle intermittent drops that caught the streetlight like scattered diamonds. The change in weather seemed to mirror the emotional transformation taking place within the gallery, as understanding deepened and connections were made that would enrich the painting's meaning for all future viewers. Sir Reginald, who had been quietly observing the evening's final revelations, approached Antoinette with the formal courtesy that characterized his every interaction. His distinguished features reflected the kind of deep appreciation that came from recognizing not just artistic achievement, but human courage, the bravery required to share such personal family history with the world. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "your decision to allow this painting to be displayed publicly, knowing that it would inevitably lead to questions about its history and provenance, required tremendous courage. Many would have chosen to keep such treasures private rather than risk the scrutiny that public exhibition brings." Antoinette's smile carried depths of emotion that spoke to years of internal debate, conversations with family members, and careful consideration of what her grandmother would have wanted. There were moments when I questioned the wisdom of this decision, she admitted. The art world can be unforgiving of irregularities, suspicious of anything that doesn't fit established patterns. But ultimately, I realised that hiding this painting away would be a betrayal of everything it represents, not just artistic achievement, but the power of love to create beauty that enriches the world. Her words seemed to resonate through the gallery like a gentle bell, creating harmonies with the rain outside and the soft tick of the antique clock. The lady in crimson watched over their quiet conversation with her painted smile, no longer mysterious, but somehow even more compelling now that her secrets had been revealed. Thompson approached the group with the respectful demeanour of someone who had been deeply moved by the evening's events. His years of security work had taught him to value protection and vigilance, but tonight he had learned that sometimes the most important security came not from locks and alarms, but from understanding and trust. "Miss," he addressed Antoinette, "I hope you know that this painting will receive the finest care we can provide, not just as a valuable artwork, but as a piece of your family's heart." The simple sincerity of his words seemed to touch something deep within Antoinette, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure wavered, revealing the emotional weight of the decision she had made to share her grandmother's portrait with the world. "Thank you," she replied softly. "That means more to me than you might imagine." As the small group prepared for their final departure, each person took a last look at the painting that had brought them together in such an unexpected way. The lady in crimson seemed to watch each of them in turn, her painted eyes holding acknowledgement of the roles they had played in bringing her story to light. Marcus Grayson switched off the gallery's main lighting system, leaving only the security lights and the soft glow from the street lamps outside to illuminate the space. In this gentler light, the painting seemed to glow with an inner radiance, as if the love that had inspired its creation continued to emanate from the canvas itself. "She'll be safe here," he promised Antoinette as they gathered their coats and prepared to venture into the rain-washed London night. "More than safe. She'll be celebrated, appreciated, loved by everyone who has the privilege of seeing her." As they stepped out into the cool night air, the rain had diminished to little more than a fine mist that seemed to bless rather than soak. The gas-lit streets of London stretched before them, their familiar patterns transformed by the water into something magical and new, much like the painting they were leaving behind, which would now be seen not as a mystery to be solved, but as a masterpiece to be treasured. Poirot walked slowly through the quiet streets, his small, precise steps creating gentle rhythms on the wet pavement. The evening's events had provided him with the kind of intellectual satisfaction that came not from exposing crime, but from revealing truth. The deeper truth that sometimes the most beautiful mysteries were not puzzles to be solved, but stories to be celebrated. Behind them, in the warm quiet of the Beaumont Gallery, the lady in crimson kept her eternal vigil, no longer guarding secrets, but sharing the endless gift of beauty with all who would look upon her with appreciative eyes. Her painted smile held all the warmth of love remembered, all the joy of art that connects hearts across the centuries, all the gentle wisdom of dreams that carry us softly into sleep. And in the peaceful rhythm of the London night, as the rain whispered its ancient lullabies against windows and walls, the mystery of the vanishing masterpiece settled into memory, not as a tale of deception discovered, but as a story of love preserved, beauty shared, and the eternal human desire to connect across time through the magical alchemy of art. The last word has been spoken, but the night is far from over. Are you listening beneath the stars of Buenos Aires, the rain-soaked windows of Berlin, the midnight calm of Nairobi, or the endless skyline of Seoul? If these tales linger in your mind, like, share, and subscribe. Until we meet again, sleep deep and let the shadows watch over you.